Many of us here at the ABC spent a lot of time with these guys, and today the organisation is grieving. Paul Lockyer also had many close relationships with staff at Channel 9, where he worked for years. People really loved and respected this group of people. And to discuss why, I'm joined by three of their close colleagues. Gary Burns was the executive producer of Midday and Sports Sunday at 9 and now oversees coverage of major events for the network. Tim Palmer is one of the ABC's most experienced reporters who's done more chopper assignments than he'd care to remember with Gary Ticehurst, including the Sydney to Hobart yacht race. And from Afghanistan, Sally Sarah, the respected foreign correspondent and the former host of Landline, where she frequently teamed up with John Bean. Sally, let me start with you. There are certain cameramen that you'll rearrange your roster or your schedule for to guarantee that you can snatch them for your assignment, and John Bean was one of those, wasn't he?
He was, Lee. That was the name that you wanted to see on the roster when you were heading out for a story. You know, journalists tell their stories with words and cameramen with pictures, and John had extraordinary talent not only to capture the landscape but to connect with the people that we were dealing with. And he was endlessly energetic, whether we were doing a story about peanuts or butterflies or wheat or drought or flood. He was always eager and great fun on the road. I remember covering Cyclone Larry with him and driving all the way from Brisbane up to Cairns to cover that, and you know, never complaining of being tired, or just a lovely fellow to share the road with. And
how was it that Beanie related to the people that you were interviewing? What was it that people liked about him?
He was a professional, he knew what he was doing, and he was just so warm. And for many of the stories that we're doing in Queensland, you know, he was a Rockhampton boy. He related very strongly to the people that we were dealing with, and I think he made people feel at ease that their stories were being told well, and that made a huge difference for us as a journalist. But I think the other thing that certainly defined John, in addition to his extraordinary work as a cameraman, was his relationship with his wife, Pip. It was one of the great love stories, and one of those relationships that you only see once or twice in your lifetime. They were utterly in love, and he was so proud of Pip, and so proud of Landline and the life that they lived. And I know many of us are, you know, to John's family and to gorgeous Pip, you know, many of the ABC colleagues just want to say thank you for sharing him with us. What a beautiful man.
Indeed, to all the families, Sally, the families of Paul Lockyer and Gary Ticehurst as well, we would thank them for what they've given. Gary Burns, what Sally Sarah says there about the talent always feeling at ease with John Bean and feeling confident that their stories would be well told, that was very much a skill that Paul Lockyer also brought to the table, wasn't it?
Exactly the same skill. I think he's the finest human being I've ever met in my life. I think many of his colleagues and all of his friends would agree with that statement. He was a man devoid of vice, vanity, all the flaws that the rest of us had. His optimism, his cheerfulness and his just open friendliness made everyone who worked with him feel relaxed, comfortable, happy.
You met him in the late 70s when you were covering Cambodia and Vietnam together, and then you went on to EP the Midday Show and you decided you'd hire Paul Lockyer for that. Now, they are two very different assignments. What was it that you saw in Paul Lockyer that you thought, this is a guy I want for Midday?
It was pretty selfish. I missed him. I missed my closest friend, and he was an exceptional reporter. I think many people are familiar with his work with the ABC in recent years, but I think a lot of people may not have known him. He was a lone voice in the post-Pol Pot period in Cambodia. He had access to the country. He spent years on the story. He was fantastic at it. And when I came back to Australia and took over Midday with Ray Martin, Ray being an old ABC boy as well, we wanted a really good reporter in there to add a bit of gravitas to a daytime television show, and that was where we got our gravitas.
Tim, you of course knew Paul Lockyer as well, very well, and you did the same beat as him for a while, the regional affairs beat, which meant that you got to fly extensively with Gary Ticehurst. Explain to people how important Gary's role was and skill in terms of helping bring stories to life.
Well, I mean, I think first of all, Gary, he almost rewrote the stereotype of what a pilot was. You know, he was a guy right down to the moustache and his BMW 6 Series coupe that he'd rock up to the helipad in, matching the colour of the helicopter, and get out and say, OK, boys, I hope you remember there's been no smoking 12 hours before takeoff and no drinking within 50 metres of the aircraft. But his professionalism you could spell out as competence. Gary was such a precise guy. You knew you were in the safest of hands. And his skill through that competence in the air completely redesigned what we could do in news coverage. I mean, the Sydney to Hobart, I think, is alive and the size that it is now because of Gary and camera guys like Mike Clem that he worked with, creating a whole new platform for pictures and not just being up in the air, but the way they told the story with those boats was absolute poetry. His precision demanded such competence of the people around him. He was very, in a way, intolerant of fools, but once he knew that you could fold the map back up the right way, and if he said you should be watching, if you got that Cessna at 10 o'clock and he knew that you could do it, he loved you. And the person he loved more than anyone in that front seat was Paul, and I think Paul gave Gary a whole new insight into the business and compassion. I noticed that Marty Warburton from Grantham wrote about Paul Lockyer today on the website that the people up there felt that they were never just stories to Paul Lockyer, and I think Gary really got into that spirit with Paul and had a real compassion over the last few years that produced this amazing friendship.
Gary, do you agree with that?
Look, possibly. I think he did love his helicopter. We used to give him a lot of time about our tax dollars and his AVGAF prices and the fact that the chopper couldn't pick any of the rest of us up and take us home if we'd had a couple of drinks. But yes, he loved his crew, he loved John and Gary, he talked about them often. I think he had a wonderful time relating to the rural population. He was a Corrigan boy, another thing he got grief about. He related instantly to his pilot and his cameraman and to everybody they met in subsequent stories.
Everyone here at the ABC is obviously devastated. What's been the reaction at 9 today?
Paul is a quintessential ABC man, almost a Renaissance ABC man. He spent nearly 10 years at 9, but really when he went home to the ABC, he went home. 9 and his colleagues at 9 who work with him on Sports Sunday and the Midday Show are really just exactly the same as everyone here is. We're all devastated.
Sally, Sarah, one of the things I think hearing everyone talk that this emphasises is just even though people see faces like yours on the TV and Paul Lockyer's, that the team behind you is just so important and gives so much.
It is. I think some of those partnerships are crucial between particular journalists and cameramen, and they are regarded as brothers. And, you know, for all the stories that go on the screen, there are so many weeks and months on the road, and there's such a strong sense of integrity. And, you know, last night here in Kabul, a world away from what had happened, I was sitting up on the roof and the phone calls were crisscrossing from Brisbane to Tokyo to Delhi to Washington regarding these 3 men and the contribution that they'd made. And, you know, I know particularly with Paul Lockyer, he'd been a mentor to many of us and shown that empathy is one of the highest qualities when you're covering people in distress. It's not a weakness, it's a strength, and I'm sure there are many people, especially in rural Australia, who will be missing him and missing Gary and missing dear John Bean very deeply tonight.
I know it's been a very big ask to expect all of you to come in and talk on television about this today, so thank you very much for doing so.